Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Banff Talks. My name is Sandra Laronde, and I'm the Director of Indigenous Arts here at the Banff Centre. And we're here to talk about the evolution of Douglas Cardinal. He was born in 1934 in Calgary, Alberta, and he is of Métis and Blackfoot descent of the Métis Blackfoot Nations. And he comes from the first Charger and the Good Striker families here in Alberta. Over his incredible career, Mr. Cardinal has received 14 honorary doctorates from universities across Canada and the United States. He is an officer of the Order of Canada. He's awarded the Gold Medal in Architecture from the Royal Architectural Institute in Canada and has been declared a World Master of Contemporary Architecture by the International Association of Architects. In Canada, he's probably best known as a visionary architect of the Canadian Museum of Civilization, now known as the Canadian Museum of History. Here in Banff, he's created one of the artist retreats here in the Leighton Artist Colony, where so many artists at this center have found a sanctuary to explore deeper thoughts and were inspired by the land around them. We're so pleased that Douglas Cardinal is here with us tonight to talk about the scope of his work, his vision, and a few highlights from his remarkable career. He is renowned for incorporating building design with the landscape around it, organic architecture, respecting the land and the history of place. So I'd like to begin by asking him about his childhood and how it all first began and how you began to understand the land around you. So tell us about where you grew up and how your relationship to the land around you developed. I understand that you spent time with your father, who was a trapper, on the land with him in the Porcupine Pine Hills and also Crow's Nest Pass. So could you tell us a little bit about being on that land with your father and how the land impacted you and your career?
Well, my father knew so much about nature. He had this really symbiotic relationship with nature, and he survived in the Depression by hunting and trapping. And my mother was her father was German background, and she was a nurse, a registered nurse, and a supervisor of a hospital. So, but she really admired my father because of the way the Anishinaabe culture honors women, and she felt that she would get really a lot of love and respect from my father. So she moved from her top position to the in the hospital to the Porcupine Hills, and she raised 8 children. As the oldest, I was surrounded by a very loving and respectful relationship from really 2 different worldviews, and but just seeing that how they related to each other, and we had a very loving childhood. But my father, he always took me out with him when I grew a little older, trapping and learning all the habits of the animals we were hunting and trapping, and realizing that, and he in a sense really honored all life around him. And so I got to really understand how beautiful life was and how amazing being a part of nature, what an amazing experience that was, because he never looked at nature as separate from him. He was a part of nature. And so that was my whole upbringing, and being really a part of nature, part of the environment, and really understanding the ways and habits of all the animals and birds we hunted. and primarily we lived off the land. And it was, and he built the log cabin in the house that we lived in. And but later on, he became a game warden, a forest ranger and a game warden, because he wanted to protect the resources of the land, and he dedicated a lot of his life to that. And so I was always, he taught me about the habits of almost every bird and every animal in the area, and the importance of the plants and the herbs and the medicines. So I really feel that I was brought up with the best of both worlds, you know. And he was very much an artist, but of course he couldn't really, he was always working for us, so he never had time to express himself, always building things. Even the furniture at night, he'd be building all the tables, chairs, beds, and everything. I mean, he built everything. So I got to work with him, you know, in the craft of building. And so that was my life with him.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about your education now. I understand from the ages of 7 to 15, you were taken away from home and sent to residential school, St. Joseph's Convent in Red Deer, Alberta, where you were taught by the Grey Nuns. And for those of you that may not know, the Grey Nuns are Roman Catholic, and they were founded in Montreal circa 1738. And it'd be interesting to hear about that experience for you.
When I first went there, we had a Reverend Mother who was very brutal, and she, we actually called, her name was Reverend Mother Lucy. We all called her Reverend Mother Lucifer. Because she had a judgment day every Friday, and we were to get so many bad marks. If we had so many bad marks, we were caned or strapped in front of everybody. And it was pretty brutal, and my brothers were with me, and I still remember them crying all night because it was just a terrible environment for children to be brought up. And we had to work out in the garden, we had to feed ourselves, we had to mend our own clothes, we had to totally look after ourselves. And when we didn't do things right, then we were in deep trouble. And then there was a Reverend Mother who followed her, was almost like a saint. I remember Reverend Mother St. Paul. She was a very beautiful woman. She was caring and loving, and it was such an amazing contrast. And the nuns that were brutal to us, they just turned right around and they became caring, and so I had these two experiences. But I decided to survive in the convent that my modus operandi was to excel. So I knew if I excelled, then I wouldn't be brutalized. So I decided that it would be much better to get holy cards than to be beaten and strapped. So I decided I would learn everything that they had to give me, but I was interested in music, so they taught me the Toronto Conservatory, and I went through the Toronto Conservatory. But also, music was my way of shutting out the environment. So I turned to music. And then I studied all the art, because they had tremendous, beautiful history in the church of architects and artists. And my mother told me at 6 years old that I was going to be the architect. She didn't argue with my mother. And so I concentrated on that when I was in the convent. And then I became the head altar boy and looking after Mass every morning and benediction every night. And so I still know Confiteor Dei Omnipotente Beate Maria Semper Virgine. I know the whole Mass in Latin. So really, the church laid the foundation for my education. And so, you know, you have to look at the good that you get out of things. And you appreciate the good more because you're faced with the difficulties. And so I do owe them a very classic education for a prairie boy, you know. Yeah.
When you left high school, you attended the University of British Columbia in their architectural program. And ultimately, you were asked to leave that program. And was that really because you wouldn't straighten the lines of buildings that you were working on? Can you tell us about that experience?
Well, they told me I didn't have the background to be a royal architect. And so I thought, well, I couldn't identify with that sort of Bauhaus kind of, you know, way of designing, you know, these boxes, like taking off all the sculpture and all the art off a building and just leaving just an awful box. And then to dress it up, you had to put paintings on the wall, and maybe you have to put a piece of sculpture in front, because it was like separating and disconnecting the art from architecture. So I was more interested in Art Nouveau and Art Deco, and to me, architecture stopped being architecture, you know, after the 1930s. I mean, I couldn't identify with the rigid boxes that opposed nature and to me were totally uninspirational. So I thought I'd go and apprentice in architectural firms. And so I did work in architectural firms and got to be a very good draftsman. But I really wanted to be an architect.
I find it interesting that a lot of people, if somebody had said to them, you know, you're not cut out to be an architect, a lot of people would just sort of accept that and think, yes, you're right, because these are people who sort of have, you know, the power to say so. And that wasn't the case for you. In fact, you ended up going to the University of Texas in Austin instead. And why Texas?
It was about as far away from Canada as I could get at the time, without speaking Spanish. Well, my father taught me, and I think he was preparing me for life, and my mother, because they knew I was different, and because of their background. And so he just taught me ever since I was little that I could do anything, that I could be anything I wanted to be and do anything and never have any barriers, you know, that the barriers were the only ones that I made myself. And so I can always remember his words when I would get into those kind of situations. So I thought, okay, the Canadian, you know, situation is racist to people of Indigenous background. So then I would leave Canada and go somewhere where people are not that way. But I ended up in Texas when it was totally segregated. You know, like white drinking fountains, black drinking fountains, and white restaurant, and, you know, and the African American sitting at the back of the bus. All that, just, you know, I couldn't It was just like, the South, the way they treated the African Americans, the way the Canadians treat the Native people. So I was going, but in Texas, I was considered a Canadian, and so I was not discriminated against. And my accent to a Texan was a Harvard accent. So it was sort of reverse discrimination. I ended up by, being invited to Governor Connolly's place, served gold service, and because I was a Commonwealth student. And so to them, I was this Canuck from up north who spoke with this Harvard accent, which they would send their kids to the north and say, "We don't care whether you get a degree or not, you just come back with that accent." Because it was a sign of education. It was strange to go from one world and then another world where all of a sudden all the doors were open to me. And but I hated this discrimination to people, and so I got very much involved in the human rights movement. And I was inspired so much by not only the African Americans that stood up for their rights and spoke up for their rights in a good way without violence, like Martin Luther King and those marvelous people, but the white folks that stood up with them against their brothers and sisters, against their parents. And I had so much respect for them that it was the European background people standing up for the rights of the African Americans. And it's too bad Canada has never done that even today. But they did that in the South. And I was supported by the vice president, who was the dean of political science. So he said, "I'll get you more than a Bachelor of Architecture degree from this university. If you work with me, you'll get a real course in politics and human rights that you'll be able to use for the rest of your life." So I got an awful lot from the University of Texas.
I find that interesting too, that often we have to go outside of our own communities and outside of our own country sometimes to really carve out our own individuality, our own sort of uniqueness sometimes. Once we're removed from that, it gives us perspective on our home and our communities and our families. That sounds very much the case.
Yes, very much so. And then I had the fortunate, because I took cultural anthropology, because I wanted to learn, if I was going to serve, people of different cultures and background, I wanted to know more about people in general, so I took cultural anthropology. But my professor, his whole thesis was on the Blackfoot Nation. And as soon as I walked in the classroom, he says, "Oh, there's a Blackfoot in my classroom." And he goes, I'm looking around, where it's Blackfoot. And then he said, "No, you." And then he says, "I know everything about your people." And see, my father felt that he would impinge my whole life and my career if, that was his way of trying to protect me. So I had to learn everything about all the amazing culture of the people in this area from the University of Texas. Which I felt, it's too bad that you have to get away to be able to learn about yourself.
On your way to Texas, I find this interesting. You drove to Arizona, where you visited Frank Lloyd Wright's studio, named Taliesin West. And I'd like to know more about what happened there for you.
Well, I always admired Frank Lloyd Wright's work because he related his work to nature, and it was organic architecture. And that was the kind of work that I thought was great. And of course, I could never receive that window into that way of thinking at the university in British Columbia. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go and study under Frank Lloyd Wright. He's the top architect, why not? So, but I went to his studio and I talked to him and spent time with him and his the architects that worked with him. But they didn't have an accredited school at the time that would be recognized in Canada, and I felt that would limit me if I wanted to come back to Canada. Mm-hmm. I did work there in Arizona for a while, but the fellow I was working with, he was from University of Texas, and he was very proud to be from Texas and the University of Texas. So he convinced me I could go there, which was an accredited school that would be internationally accepted. Mm-hmm. But Frank Lloyd Wright, I asked him, what makes a great architect, like someone that everybody looked up to and admires? He said, first of all, you work on the man. You have to develop yourself as an individual. You have to feel that you train yourself so well, and you have such discipline in training yourself that you feel that you have something to offer. Mm-hmm. And then you go really into yourself a lot, where you feel that you have something beautiful inside that you want to share with other people. And I always felt his architecture was very beautiful. Mm-hmm. And it combined painting and sculpture and craft and architecture. Mm-hmm. To me, he was an architect.
Mm-hmm. I understand that you also drove further to the south, to Mexico, and you were inspired by Teotihuacan, which is a pre-Columbian Mesoamerican city. It's just located 30 miles or 48 kilometers of modern-day Mexico City. And what was it like to see indigenous architecture of that magnitude in Teotihuacan?
Well, I thought all that crap I got that because I was indigenous, that I couldn't be an architect, when I saw the amazing works of architecture by the indigenous people of the Americas. And they had amazing cities and clean cities and beautiful cities, much better than Europe had in their cities. And so it, to me, was very inspiring, and saying, if I get more in touch with my own indigenous background, and use that as a foundation also in my architectural expression, then it would mean that I could, I could develop myself as an architect, but with a unique signature.
Mm-hmm. Yes, a very unique one. You did your thesis. Can you tell us what your thesis was about?
Oh, my thesis, because I always loved Banff, and I love the setting. And this whole area, you see, is really a part of the Blackfoot territory and people for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful setting. So my thesis was a building here in Banff. And I designed the building that was fitting in and working in harmony with the mountains and the river and the land. And to me, it was so important to have a setting in these mountains that are just amazing, that have architecture that would blend in and not oppose it, not be like, this is man and that's nature, particularly when nature is so overwhelming. And so why not be more humble when you approach the Rocky Mountains and just say, well, perhaps, we can be a part of that. And so, yeah, that was my thesis.
And I mean, you've been based in Ottawa, in Ontario, and do you miss being in Alberta? Because it's been many years that you've really been
Yeah,
situated.
I really do. But you go where your work is, and I've had some amazing patrons in the East that support, but I always want to do work in Alberta because my roots are here, and I feel totally different when I come here. There's a sense of connectedness, much more than I feel in Ottawa.
Once you graduated, you returned from the University of Texas. You returned to Canada, and you started your practice in 1964. And just within a few years, in 1967, you were working on what would become one of the most important projects of your early career and maybe even of your entire career, and that was St. Mary's Church.
Yes.
And can you tell us about how you approached that project and why they let you do it? Because it would have been a very risky venture on their part.
There was this priest who was Father Merckx, who is a German oblate priest that was educated in Rome, who was a musician. And he wanted to design a church around the new liturgy, which was a whole different way of laying out the church design. And we started talking together, and I started sketching his ideas, and he really wanted me to be the architect for the church. We had this, because I had a lot of scars, that I had in the church. And I think what you do is you have to forgive, because if you don't forgive, you close off your heart by being angry and resentful. So my way of dealing with that pain was forgiveness, and then giving the church an act of love and caring. And so I really devoted my energy in making sure that I was able to bring his vision into reality. And his vision was, I want a Catholic church without a crucifix or cross anywhere. I want no statues in the church. I want the church to say, I'm a Catholic church, past, present, and future, and just in the sculptural form of the building and the way it's laid out. That was a very interesting, possibility. And then he convinced the Archbishop that I should be the architect. But I knew the Archbishop in a racial incident when I was a kid, and I was beat up and thrown in jail. And to rationalize this, the community were trying to make me the problem, and I would go to jail for 5 years for nothing. The Archbishop interceded, and he hired the best lawyer of Western Canada to defend me, and he saved my life. So I felt that I had the real opportunity of returning that. He saw the design, he loved the design, but he told Father Merckx, I want you to put 12 consecration stones in the church, and I'll personally consecrate it as a cathedral. It was a wonderful experience, because when you open your heart out to people, it always is a sort of amazing thing to happen.
This is Archbishop Jordan.
Archbishop Jordan,
Yes.
Yeah. He was just a very fine person.
I'd like to switch gears a bit here and talk to you about technology, because it may seem paradoxical to some that you are well known for your relationship to the land, to the organic shape, to the curve, and also one of the first to use computer-aided design technology in architecture. Can you tell us a bit about how you got interested in computer software and what it was like in the 1960s using cutting-edge computer programming, and how important, I guess that's a secondary question, how important was technology in allowing you to execute your artistic vision?
Well, I couldn't have built the church without computers. I designed the roof so that it would work not only aesthetically inside, but also acoustically. It had to be a certain shape, and it was totally amorphous. And so, and it was a catenary form out of post-tension concrete. And so we could do a model analysis of it, but we had to do a rational analysis, engineering analysis. And we had to resolve 81,000 simultaneous equations. Try to solve X, Y, and Z, 3 unknowns, then 81,000. Now, the mathematicians at the time said it would take them seven mathematicians 100 years just to work out all the formulas. So they told me this is impossible. But when you declare you're going to do something, as a declaration, the universe shifts a bit because you create the possibility it can occur. Without you declaring it, nobody's going to show up to help you out. And the Dr. Alfred Parham, the Cement Association, Portland Cement Association, we got Swiss Cables, we found a computer in Chicago that was floors, all in tubes. Like the computer was floors and floors of tubes. And we had punch cards, and we solved all the equations. And so we were able to continue on with the project. Father Merckx was very concerned because we were actually building the walls and we hadn't quite solved the problems of the roof. and then I said, Father, you know that between us we're doing a spiritual act. You've got to have faith. But so it was a real challenge. But I didn't realize that I couldn't do a project like that in Canada. I mean, I was too dumb, to realize. So I did it, and it seemed impossible, but it's there.
Yes. St. Mary's was definitely a milestone in your career as one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen.
But in the technology, you see, I saw, in the 70s that the Americans had developed a technology which they could place all the coordinates of the Earth in a computer of every city, so they could zoom in the back pocket of a Russian in Red Square and plant an atomic bomb. So I thought, now there's the technology that I need to define my organic forms. And they changed from tubes to chips, so that, transistors and whatever, so that computers were almost affordable, but not quite. I went down to Texas, where everything is possible because they have a can-do philosophy, like if anybody can do it, we can do it, and they did it. They programmed the computer and the software for me, and then I bought a computer, and it was a mainframe like the size of a fridge that sat in an air-conditioned room, which was 512K, like half a mega, and it cost $250,000. And then the disk drive, which is like a washing machine, and of 120 megabyte disk, it cost 60 grand. And so I made one heck of a commitment to proceed to the computer age. But my staff, they trained me how to run the whole thing, so I came back to the office and said, look, isn't this marvelous? It took all this. So I'm saying, and look, I can send it to plot, and it draws at 30 inches a second. And my staff were just like terrified. So I thought, how? I'm not going to get all, have people resist this. I mean, I made this investment. I did like Cortez did. You got to burn their ships so they'll go forward. So I threw out all the drawing boards, pencils, and everything, and put computer terminals in front of them. And we had a project like St. Albert Place. We were under construction, under design, and I said, we're going to design the first building on the computer. And we did. That started our whole leadership in that technology.
Pioneer.
Yeah.
A lot of people associate you with the Canadian Museum of Civilization, now called the Canadian Museum of History. I found this quite interesting. In Indigenous culture, we believe that art already exists, and it's the artist that is kind of a conduit or the vessel that delivers it up, but it already is there in existence, waiting. And can you share with us how this philosophy was related to you by an elder in terms of architecture?
I had sat across from the table for the 52 Chiefs of Alberta for 10 years, petitioning Trudeau's awful programs for Indigenous people. But when I entered the competition, so then the elders were saying, when you go there, you have to understand that you're the grandchild of all your ancestors, all your grandfathers and grandmothers, that you are their product of thousands of years, but you are the grandfather of all the generations that come after you. So within you is the past, the present, and the future. So you have to understand when you go on that site, and it's a very important project for all Canadians, including us, our Indigenous people, everything is in the museum. You have to, in a sense, realize that the building is already there. It just happens to be in the future. And it's up to you as you walk on the site to feel it and just unconceal it, because it's already there. It's just in the future, but in a very near future. So I did those sketches, and they're very similar to what we have in the building itself.
So the museum was 7 years in the making.
Yeah.
It was opened in 1989, and it involved the help and the support of Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau to some extent. And so can we explore that a little bit and take us through, first of all, I want to know, is it true that you're related to Pierre Elliott Trudeau?
Well, it was funny, we had sort of fought each other for all these years, and I ended up as the architect. And when at the opening, of the museum, he was there for the architect's celebration, and he was there, and we were sitting at the table together. And this nun comes up to us, and she says, I'm related to you both. And I go, what? But she knew Pierre, and she says, Pierre, you know that I'm related to you. But she says, do you know that your grandmother and Doug's grandfather were brother and sister? And we looked at each other, and Pierre just killed himself laughing. And he just thought that was quite amazing. So we ended up as very good friends.
Can you take us through the artistic process of designing and executing a project of that size, that scope, and that significance?
Well, when I was designing the project, I was under terrible pressure by the Prime Minister. He set up a separate Crown corporation called Canada Museum Construction Corporation, answerable to him, so he was the client. And it was through communications, not in public works. He told everyone, and myself included, that the bureaucracy of Canada can't do anything right. It's inept. It's overbloated, it can't be creative, and he wouldn't let the bureaucracy touch it. That's why he created a separate Crown corporation. And so through this corporation, we were given a task to get approvals from some 15 government departments. So from February to October, I had to make over 80 presentations to get all the approvals of all the government departments. And when I got the National Capital Commission, which is the final approval, I was called in to his office the next day, and he was monitoring the whole progress. And then he called me in and he says, I want you to bring all the models and drawings and everything, because I'm going to present it to Cabinet and get approval. So we got together, and he had to know everything, and he was so smart, like anything, he would have this tremendous memory. I went over everything with him and for a couple of hours, and then he called in the Cabinet. So then he came into the Cabinet and he made the presentation himself with everything, didn't miss a beat. And we had the models and everything outside the Cabinet room, and that's where I was sitting while he was in the Cabinet room. And he presented, and he said, isn't that great, isn't that wonderful? And they said, yes, Prime Minister. And then he says, well, we're going to approve it. And they said, well, we don't have any money for this. And nobody's budgeted for this. And he said, well, I've been thinking this over. We're building all these armaments, you know, in this Cold War with Russia. Russia is no threat to anybody. They're only a threat to themselves. And they're going to go down the tube, and, you know, like, why? Why are we doing this, you know? He says, what I'm going to do is take a frigate from the Minister of Defense's budget. And the Minister of Defense said, you can't do that, you know? He says, yes, I can. He says, you choose. Go out and see the model of the museum, or picture a frigate in some far-off sea somewhere rusting, and shouldn't that frigate be on the Ottawa River as the National Museum? And so Defense Minister come out, and he was looking around, and they come back, and he says, you're right. So the Prime Minister says, good, it's all approved? And everybody says, yep. So he walked out of the meeting, and he says, Doug, you're to start construction tomorrow. So I said, you know, Prime Minister, these are just like sketches, like concepts, and, you know, I said, it's on an earthquake zone, it's on a flood plain. All the technologies you wanted, a lot of it haven't been created yet. And you don't even own the site, it belongs to the province of Quebec. And he says, how long will it take to get all this straightened out? I said, if I worked night and day, it would take 2 years, I'm sure, you know, to put the drawings together. The building is 1 million square feet. It has the same environmental conditions that you want throughout as a hospital operating room, like to protect all the artifacts and all the treasures. He says, you have to understand one thing, this is a democracy. I might not even be around in 2 years. So you're to start construction tomorrow. So I said, yes, Prime Minister. And it was like, it was crazy because I had a whole team that was appointed to me from Quebec. My partner was the president constituency for Marc Lalonde, who was, you know, head of all the political patronage at the time for Quebec. So I thought, well, how was I going to do this? Because it didn't make any sense, because it was like giving your most important performance in Carnegie Hall, and you were composing and conducting at the same time an orchestra of people that have never played your instrument, have played your music before. And like, this doesn't make any sense. So then it became like, okay, it has no reason. There's no logic to it. So you just say, okay, I have a commitment to do it. And then you just do it. And so the next day, we had to put a hoarding contract, get bulldozers on the site. And we did a series of contracts in sequential tenders, 258 contracts. The minute we did something, we put it out for tender, and the contractor was there. And the minute, while the contractor was building, we were doing the next stage and built on top of that. And we kept doing that until the building was built. It was like, I don't know, a 16-hour day for 7 years.
Yeah. Amazing.
It was crazy.
Yeah. And then the government changed.
Oh, yeah.
And then Mulroney came into power, and my understanding is that he wanted to straighten the lines of the museum, put aluminum siding up in place of the stonework. And what was this experience like, having the new government step in? And
Well, they were campaigning to, like be fiscally responsible. And we were working within a budget. There was two budgets. One was the frigate budget of 80 million, but the actual cost of the museum was actually 200 million, of which nobody said to the public it would be 200 million. So, so when the new government, so it was a real challenge because they came in and we had 5 cranes on the job, and we're just going like gangbusters to build everything. I saw that all these changes, even lino on the floors instead of stone, and I thought, across from Parliament, they want a pile of junk. I thought, they deserve it. I mean, they are, unbelievable in Ottawa, and they have done disastrous things to the Indigenous people, So my thing was, okay, they deserve a pile of junk because that's their vision. So I went back, and talked to the elders about this. Those people, they were crazy in Ottawa. And they said, you have to understand one thing, Doug. You're missing a great opportunity. You're playing a victim. And victims are always right. Now, if you can be right and be a victim, and then you lose that great possibility of doing something for all Canadians. So you have a personal agenda to be right, and that is not a warrior, A warrior is not a victim. And so what you have to do is the people that you're working with, you have to open up their hearts. You got to look at them a different way. You're looking at them the wrong way. And you have to see them in another way as people of honor and integrity, because what you see in people you project, and they respond to you. So you have to look at it in a different way. So get back there and get off your personal agenda and stop playing a victim.
good advice.
Yeah, real good advice.
Yeah.
So I went back and I just came there and I said, this is a vision for all Canadians, and this is a commitment that we need to have together. And then Joe Clark and Mazinkowski and Harvey Andre and all the Alberta MPs showed up, and they became my new patrons. And they got if it wasn't for the Alberta group, they became the new patrons. And so then, because an architect can't do anything without a patron. Musicians can play, and art, you can paint. But architects, you need a patron, because it's millions of dollars of their money, their politics, their careers, and everything. So there's a sacred trust between an architect and his patron. And yes, they made it happen. We set the budget the way it's supposed to be, and then we built the project within the budget. And because they wanted to be fiscally responsible, and that was what they campaigned on. And so it was a great experience. 40,000 people came to the opening.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing.
What do you think the Indigenous perspective of our architecture can bring to the world of architecture?
Well, I think that we need to build environments that are more in harmony with nature and more in harmony with our own nature. And I think that the Indigenous perspective, of which we were all Indigenous at one time, we all come from land, we were all connected to one land or another, so we all have that same need to be in harmony with your environment and with nature. And what we have as Anishinaabe people, we haven't forgotten the need to be in harmony with each other and in harmony with the earth. So buildings are the second most polluting machines on the planet. And the first most polluting machines are cars. And so we've got to do something about environment that we're living in, because we're giving our children a legacy of poisonous waters, poisonous air, and destroyed forests, destroying our ecology. We're destroying species every day, which shows no respect for life, nor our own life, because how can we plan a future without planning the future of all of our life givers? Like everything that is important to us. And so my generation has created a real disastrous mess on this planet. And the next generation is going to have to clean it up for their children. It is a tradition of Indigenous culture that whatever you do, being responsible, totally responsible for your lineage, and also the fact that you affect people for 7 generations. So every decision you make is not just about yourself, your selfish self, your own ego and what you want and what you can exploit and take. You affect the future of all your children, your great-grandchildren, 7 generations. So I think that the Indigenous culture teaches you responsibility. And I think that the way that we're acting in the world is that we're being totally irresponsible. I mean, just to think you can, even in my lifetime, when I was a kid, I could go in the water, in the rivers, in the lakes, and grab fish and drink the water. They're all poison now, and so are the fish. Like, how irresponsible that is. And so I think that we're taught as Indigenous people, as my father taught me, to be totally responsible for what you do and respect all life and honor all life, because that life, you're not separated from that life. You and that life are one. The spirit that flows through you, spirit flows through every living being and flows through every one of your brothers and sisters throughout the world. You can't separate yourself.
In your career, you've had a lot of sacrifices to make. And partly, Douglas I heard you speak actually at the Museum of Civilization, and it was a really powerful, and the word that kept resonating was uncompromising. You talked about uncompromising, that really has become a theme throughout your career. And can you tell us, when you have that perspective, when you have that philosophy, what kind of sacrifices follow such a statement?
Well, you have to be willing to put everything on the line, because when you make a commitment to somebody to keep your word, it's a totally unreasonable commitment. I mean, to make a commitment to your partner, for example, you know, from love and everything, and a commitment of loving and caring, that's beyond reason. That's something that's another level. And there's nothing more powerful than commitment. But you have to become your word, and in a sense, you have to realize that if you become reasonable, people will reason you out of your commitment. They say, be reasonable. But what if you're not reasonable? Because really commitments are not reasonable. They're something that you'll do no matter what, you know. Because you have to realize in our culture, and also in Adoya's culture, who's also indigenous, your word is your honor, and you have to be your word. And that's very much the same in our culture. You give your word on a sacred oath, like on a pipe, you give your word. You have your ancestors, the Creator, then says you gave your word, and you can't back down. And what is compromise anyway in English? It is, com means to go against, promise. You made a promise and you're going to go against it. And if you're going to do something, you keep your word. And the reason why people don't do that is based in fear. They're afraid of something is going to happen to them. And what I appreciate about the ceremonies, you know, in the culture, is it teaches you to be fearless. And so, what if you don't have any fear, and then you keep your word? Because it's fear that keeps you small. But then you have to realize, you know, what the heck, you know? We're not going to get off this planet alive anyway, so what the hell? You know, what do we got to be afraid of? We could be cowards and die 1,000 deaths, or say, okay, I'm going to die once, but I'm not going to run my life in fear. But there's no capital punishment for practicing architecture. They can take away all your goods, but that's just material.
That's material. Yeah. I'd like to fast forward now and explore your work through the lens of what is happening today in architecture. Can we talk about the trends for a moment? There's a lot of condos going up in cities across the globe, a lot of glass boxes, although there are some really beautiful glass boxes out there, if they're well executed, that is. But how does your vision connect to trends? Or maybe your vision is not about being popular or connecting to trends at all.
I think that I have to be true to the commitments that I make to my clients. My job is to bring their visions into reality, not my visions. It is their visions that I'm committed to. And like I say, it's a sacred trust because it is their resources, their money, their prestige and everything, and you're bringing their vision into reality. I feel that we should do something even more to be more sustainable, to be more, to create buildings that will last longer and be more beautiful and more respectful of people and more respectful in the environment. And I don't win all the arguments, of course, because it is their vision. I can only petition them. But I've had some amazing clients, some amazing patrons, because it is those patrons that allow me to practice architecture. You can't do work without a patron. And so I've had all of these amazing patrons that have commissioned me.
Can we jump to speaking about artistic influences and peers, and talking about, can you talk about an artist or an architect who has influenced your vision and development? And I'm particularly interested in the group of sevens, Lauren Harris, and your relationship to Lauren Harris.
Well, I met Lauren Harris at the University of British Columbia. And I think that's what made me totally rethink about architecture, because I saw his work as expressing the Canadian landscape in a very powerful way, with very powerful colors. So he took a European media and an expression and turned it into something that's really Canadian and really from the Americas, you know. And I thought, I should do that in architecture. I should take the natural forms of this powerful landscape, like we have surrounded here in Banff, and take those forms and those elements in nature and express that in my architecture, just like the Greeks did with their forms. They took all their forms from their flora and their fauna and took the proportions of the male and female and created their whole architecture based on their relationship with nature and each other. Why not do that in the Americas? Why not do that in Canada? And make powerful statements that truly belong on this land, not from somewhere else, or a philosophy that belongs somewhere else, that grew out of the landscape here, that grew out of the roots here, roots of people that have been here thousands of years. Why not develop an architecture with those roots?
And so many other art forms.
Yeah.
You know, writing, dance, everything, you know, to explore more what can come out of our own landscape and from our own soil and land, I think is we still need to see more of it in this country. And
yes, definitely, because there's so much knowledge, there's so much beauty that is here in people's hearts. It just needs to be expressed out there to create a much more beautiful society.
For you, does obviously being an architect also means being an artist. So what is the relationship for you between artistic vision and function?
Well, Vitruvius said that architecture is firmness, commodity, and delight, which means that it has to be, you know, stable and structural, and it has to be functional, but it has to be delightful. It has to be beautiful. I think that is one of the basis of the Renaissance in architecture at that time, but I feel that it is the basis for the kind of architecture we should have. And that, I think that how you connect people is by beauty. You know, see beautiful music, beautiful dance, beautiful sculpture, beautiful painting, beautiful architecture. And you can shape your environment, as they say, but in turn it shapes you. So if you're warehousing children in awful, horrible boxes for 12 years of their lives, what are you going to bring the children up? They're influenced by the environment that they're forced to be in. We have never, in this day and age, where we're supposed to be more intelligent, more knowledgeable, we have never created such ugliness on the planet in the building of our cities. The buildings that are built are exploitive. They just suck your very soul when you come into these buildings. They're brutal. And if one had a nightmare of what not to do, that would be what our cities are like. I mean, and we're supposed to be, you know, highly civilized, mature, you know, knowledgeable people of the new millennium, and look at the crap we're doing. It is like, I feel, in a sense, buildings in the cities we create are a physical manifestation of where we at as a people. You want to go and study where the Greeks are at, you go and study the Parthenon. You want to study where we are at, you go and visit Detroit. I think that's beneath us as human beings, for the public, for the people, to allow that to happen. And that's why I always believe not in top-down planning. No changes come from top-down planning. The way changes are made is from bottoms-up planning. You work with the people and bring their vision into reality. And I think that the patrons I've had feel that that was a proper approach to put a building together. Work with the people, work with the users, and not have these exploitive systems of power and control create these kinds of environments that we have to survive in, not live in, survive in.
Sometimes I think, when I think about beauty and what that is, I think part of it is beauty is health made visible. It's about health, and when something is healthy and made visible, it is incredibly beautiful. You know, so I think beauty and health, there's something that goes hand in hand in that. My last question for you is to talk about what you're working on now, Douglas. You have projects in Ottawa, Toronto, and Beijing. Is your style still evolving, changing? And can you tell us as well what you're working on right now in these respective cities just named?
I'm working on a whole block in Toronto.
Just a block, huh?
Yeah, on Cherry Street and Front Street. And it is to be an Indigenous hub that expresses our values in the waterfront district of Toronto, in contrast to the values expressed with all those ugly condos. And the idea is that it should be, you know, rooted on the earth, and it should be beautiful, it should be flowing, and it should be dynamic, and it should be alive, and it should be sustainable, and all those good things. And I hope that the sponsors will be able to, and my clients and my patrons will be able to find a way to pull it off. But we have tremendous support from the Ontario government to make it happen, because there are over 60,000 Indigenous people in Toronto.
Yes.
And the idea is that they can make a difference in a good way, and in a healthy way. So it'd be a place where everybody would be welcome and sort of go, you know.
And in Beijing, you're working on?
Well, we're working with they want to preserve 56 Indigenous communities in China. And the Deputy Minister invited Adoy and I to assist them and help them develop terms of reference, and working with them to make that happen. Because they believe that, as they mentioned to me, that in developing as they have with Western exploitive systems and everything, they're sort of choking in their own pollution. And so they have to get back to their Chinese roots, which is balance and harmony with nature. And so they said, the indigenous people now are like flowers. We need them. We need them to remind us how we should connect ourselves with the land and with each other. We have to protect them. We have to preserve them. We have to help them. And I thought that was rather a beautiful vision that the minister was committed to. So if anything, we made a commitment to help in this process. And we discovered some amazing people over there. They're all amazing, but some cultures that really are quite amazing.
Yeah, it's a rich culture.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being here and for coming all the way to the Banff Centre from Ottawa and just to be with us at Banff Talks this evening. And also you spoke with the Indigenous Writing Program, the participants in that. And I really want to thank you for everything that you've done. And it's just a pleasure to interview you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.